Once upon a time, there was a human. An earthling, as sometimes they like to be called. Now, as we all know, humans can be very anxious creatures, full of worry, and minds full of thoughts about this and about that. A lot of them have yet to discover that all that mind chatter is of very little significance. This is even more true when they wish to relax or go to sleep. On the surface of things, of life, and of the universe, it seems very chaotic. But the reality is that behind all that, in a deeper, subtler level, there is nothing but peace, tranquility, and bliss. This deep reality is the same state of being all creatures are. Even you exist in this very deep, calm, vastless ocean of pure, gentle, and relaxing bliss. And through this story, we will guide you to it, so that you may let go of every single problem and relax and fall deeply into a beautiful slumber. Our story begins where all stories begin. Once upon a time. Once upon a time, there was a human called Nathaniel. He was working out in the fields, preparing the crop for harvest. The fields were bathed in a bronze golden light, and the scent of freshly cultivated earth filled his nostrils. It was a welcome scent that refreshed his mind. For 7 hours he had been working the land. His muscles ached and his hands were numb with pain. A moment ago his head was getting heavier and heavier, for he had been worrying that he may not have enough crops for the winter. But now, with the coming dusk, the sun had broken through the clouds and wrapped his body in a warm and comforting embrace. The golden hues shining a sun-kissed ray of light on his day's work. A warm and gentle breeze brushed over his face as he realised the crop was bountiful. His hard and gruelling work had been worth the effort. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that there would be enough food to see him and his family through the winter. There was even enough left over that he knew he would be able to give the extra to his neighbours. Nathaniel leaned on his sickle, the long, sturdy wooden stick holding up his exhausted and heavy body. He smiled. He felt a deep and rich gratitude. He thanked the sun, the rain, the ground. He thanked his body, especially his back, his arms and his legs. For a moment he became completely thoughtless, his mind becoming absorbed in the scene. He couldn't be sure if it was a thunderclap or his son calling out to him that brought his attention back. But his sideways glance observed a billowing dark cloud, crackling with sprawling light streaks. He was glad he had already tied down the crops for the night. The log cabin was barely visible as the rain began to pour down. He could hear his son calling to him to come into the house. Nathaniel made strong strides towards the house, the rain pelting down so hard he had to continuously wipe the water from his eyes. His once dry and crusty clothes were now like cold, wet towels. It was still a few minutes until he reached his home. A shiver ran through his body, and with it all his energy and warmth disappeared. The ground became marshy, and each squelch, each step became longer and heavier until he wondered if he would make it. But he knew his son was watching. He couldn't let him see his father weep. So with every ounce of his fading strength and determination, he forced his way through. Each step his body became heavier and heavier. Each step he was getting colder and colder, until eventually, through his tired and heavy eyes, he saw the ember glow radiating out of his open wooden door. He raised his hand out, and a warm and gentle hand clasped his and pulled him inside. The huge wooden door creaked and closed behind him. Barely opening his eyes, he saw a towel being thrown over his head. He felt the pressure of small hands rubbing his hair dry. When it stopped, he opened his tired eyes, and his son was standing in front of him, smiling warmly. Behind his son, his wife was preparing the fire. She put extra logs on it, and the crackling fire roared into life. For a moment, it lit up the entire living area, revealing Nathaniel's bedclothes, brand new soft fleece pyjamas. He peeled off his wet clothes, each movement slowed by exhaustion. His wife, seeing him struggle, helped him to put on the warm, cozy fleece pyjamas and guided him to the big, soft, comfortable chair by the fire. He sat there for a long moment, the fire slowly and gently warming his face, his body sinking deeper and deeper into the big, comfortable chair. He gazed deep and long into the fire, letting go of all thought. He became absorbed in the flickering hues of orange, yellow, and white. His body cozy and warm, his body sinking deeper and deeper, his mind letting go, his eyes getting heavier and heavier, his eyes unable to stay open, his mind letting go. Nathaniel is complete. His day is done. There is nothing left to do but relax and let go. He is calm, relaxed, bathed in bliss and tranquility, comfort and warmth. He is letting go into peaceful slumber. letting go. Nathaniel's wife, Yana, took great satisfaction watching her husband slowly drift off to sleep. She sat snugly by his side, mesmerized by the oscillating light of the warm fire. She could hear her husband's deepening breath as he ebbed deeper and deeper into slumber. She gently and slowly stood up from her warm, comfortable chair and glided slowly into the kitchen. She was met with a scented burst of freshly cultivated herbs. Lemon balm, lavender, rosemary and sage filled the air, instantly transporting Yana to a state of aromatic bliss. The freshness of the heavenly fragrance reminded her vividly of that day's work, where she gathered the herbs along the peak of the nearby hills. Her heart lightened as she remembered the twinkling yellow rays of sunlight that seemed to dance upon the emerald green grass. The atmosphere was so quiet, she was sure she could hear the blades of grass gently blowing in the warm and gentle breeze. Beautiful butterflies appeared as if out of nowhere and fluttered gracefully in front of her, eventually settling on an ancient, mossy rock. She was completely alone, but she felt completely at one with all the nature that surrounded her. It was as familiar as a dear old friend, where no words were needed to know that you are absolutely welcome, cared for and nurtured, that there is nothing to do, nothing to think about, nothing but surrendering to the moment and letting go of everything. As she cut the herbs, she took great, gentle care not to disturb the little creatures living there. Often ladybirds would hop onto her delicate and smooth hands. She would place them ever so slowly on the ground next to her, and she would marvel at the beauty of these tiny little beings. As she picked the herbs, her hands became infused with their wonderful smells. Nature's perfume, she thought. The heavenly aroma further dissolved her thinking mind, dissolving and dissolving into pure and absolute bliss. She began to feel very, very tired. She lay on a long, outstretched boulder, covered in dry, thick, deep green moss. She was surprised just how comfy it was. The dry, thick, deep green moss was as soft as 100 fleece cushions and had been warming all day in the late summer sun. Nature's bed, she thought, as she stretched out her body. Her heavy weight spread itself into the mossy, soft rock, and as she closed her eyes, she felt as light as a feather. She could hear birds gently chirping in the distance, and could hear the subtle sound of a small waterfall. Passing clouds would gently dull across her eyes, deepening her sleepiness, deepening her will to let go. The sun warming her body like a solar heated blanket, and with the gentle breeze caressing her face, she let go and fell deeper and deeper into a wonderful, deep and satisfying sleep. The relaxing rest earlier that day released enough energy that Yana was able to gather more herbs than what they could possibly use. As she stood in the kitchen gazing at the pure abundance of wonderfully scented herbs, her heart warmed, knowing how much her neighbours will appreciate it when she shares them tomorrow. Sharing beautiful things and experiences always made Yana smile. As she began to put the bunches of herbs into the cupboard, she began to long for the warmth of the fire. The kitchen floor, as well as the wall, were made of huge, uneven, cold bricks, grey and growing colder as the moon began to rise and the winds began to stir. The cave-like kitchen had lost all of its heat. Yana, barefooted, felt the shiver of every icy step she made across the cold, hard stone. The colder she got, the more she could feel her exhausted body, her exhausted mind. It began to long for bed. As she put away the last bunches of herbs, her arms got heavier and heavier, until every moment of her heavy arms, every movement felt like she was lifting dense and heavy weights. As she closed the pantry door, she noticed her son standing innocently at the kitchen door. Smiling, and with gentle, wholesome love in his bright, shining eyes, he pointed to the bathroom. Still cold and deeply exhausted, she walked heavily toward the bathroom. As she opened the door, a plume of thick, warm, lavender-scented steam billowed out. Her son had run a bath for her. She flicked a glance of deep gratitude toward him and kissed the top of his head. He looked up at her with pure, innocent love and then departed. Yana closed the bathroom door and made her way to the big, welcoming bath. She slowly slid her hand into the water. It was the perfect temperature. The scent of lavender already beginning to relax her mind. As she stepped into the warm and soothing bath, she felt her body warming up. She slowly and gently slipped her body into the warm and soothing embrace of the lavender-scented water. She felt her exhausted and tired body simply melt away. The lavender evoking beautiful memories of that day's harvesting. In her mind's eye, gentle and slow appearances of beautiful and bright yellow buttercup flowers, of warm orange and red butterflies fluttering in the midday sun. And with that vision, she sighed a deep and satisfying sigh of deep, deep relief. She lay there for a while, relaxing into a beautiful state of pure and absolute bliss. Some time later, when she felt bath water start to cool, she gently and slowly raised her body out of the bathtub. Her wet and warm body meeting the cold air of the hollow room, the freshness enabled her just enough energy to wrap a huge, big, soft towel around her. As she moved through the house towards the bedroom, she began to get colder and colder, eventually feeling an icy shiver run through her tired and exhausted body. As she got to the foot of her bed, she almost leapt into it, falling into the thick and huge fleece blankets. The silky softness of the material instantly comforting her with a warm and cosy embrace. She rolled herself into a cocoon and lay there, still and complete. She smiled. She smiled gently. She let go. Her body dissolving into deep and satisfying sleep. She gently let go, letting go, letting go. Yana and Nathaniel's son, Matthew, felt the house become very still and very quiet. He felt his parents' presence disappear into sleep. He felt a deep sense of relief. He saw how hard they both worked during the day and was deeply happy that they now could rest. He opened his bedroom door and heard them both breathing, slow, deep and restful breaths. It was a wholesome and wonderful sense of pure and total comfort. He felt deeply loved and cared for, and felt deep love and care for them. He closed his bedroom door and jumped onto his bed, pulling the covers over his small head. He clicked on his nightlight and brought it under the covers to light up his diary. He had just a little bit to finish before he too would gently slip into a beautiful and satisfying slumber. He reminded himself of where he was by reading the first part of today's entry. Today is the final day of harvest, he read. Mummy and Daddy said that today is the day we find out if we have enough crops and herbs to use to see us through the winter. I felt a little bit scared because I'm smart and I know that little boys and their mummies and daddies need enough harvest or bad things can happen. But Mummy said I don't need to worry. I wanted to help Daddy in the fields. He said I was too small to help this year, but said I might be able to help next season if I get bigger. I did my exercises lots today so I can get bigger and bigger. But Mummy said that would take a long, long time and it wouldn't make me big enough to help in the fields today. Daddy said I should be a kid for as long as possible and I should spend the day having fun. And so that's exactly what Matthew did. He had fun. Earlier that day, he decided to go on a great adventure. There were some red rock mountains far, far away, beyond many, many horizons. He packed himself some supplies and started walking. He walked and walked, then walked some more. The sky was azure, like the colour of lapis lazuli. His movement across the plains were as light as a feather. He bounded towards each horizon, wondering if the red rocky mountains were just behind it. Each time, another expanse of lime green fields opened up in front of him. It seemed a lot further than what was in his head. But after reaching each horizon, he wondered about what was over the next one. Each new horizon opened up whole new possibilities. By the next horizon, he could see the peak of the dry red rocky mountain. He lifted his gaze upward and peered deeply into the deep blue sky. He saw that the sun was at its peak. High noon, he thought. His little legs were getting very, very exhausted, so he decided to rest. Sitting with his legs crossed on the soft, dry lime green grass, he again looked upward. He wondered about the sun, how warm and comforting it was, how it shined light onto everything. He held out his arm and felt the heat caress his skin. He closed his eyes and focused on his forearm. The heat felt very similar to the way his mum would gently caress it while singing beautiful lullabies. With his eyes still closed, it felt like his mum was there with him. In the distance of his mind, he could hear her angelic voice, subtle and full of love. He could hear and feel connection they had. He could feel her fingers slowly, millimetre by millimetre, move up and down on his forearm with tenderness. With this, his head began to feel heavier and heavier. He was slipping gently in and out of consciousness. As his heavy body felt sleep coming on, his head nodded out. He took a huge, deep and satisfying breath, then lay down on his back. He stretched out his legs and felt the comfort of the soft grass warmed by the sun. This made his whole body do one huge, relaxing and satisfying stretch, after which he felt so cozy. He curled his body into the fetal position. Laying on his side, he gently drifted off to sleep. He gently ebbed into a deep and satisfying slumber. Eventually, when he gently awoke, he slowly opened his eyes to see that the sun had moved about an hour. He sat up, refreshed, stretched his small body, stood up and headed for the next horizon. By now, the red rock mountain, its peak was getting taller and closer. Almost there, he excitedly thought. He began to walk faster and faster until he was standing on the last horizon. Before him, a huge mammoth giant of a mountain rolled up high into the sky, making him feel like a tiny ant looking up at a huge giant human. The mountain range was red and dusty, the ground deep orange sand. He felt like he had been transported to a whole new world. Egypt, perhaps, Mesopotamia. He imagined he was riding a camel, and that he was some ancient pharaoh. He imagined that the mountain was a pyramid, and went in search of his treasure. He looked for caves that were deep enough where treasure may be hidden. He found one. As he entered, the coolness of the air inside was as refreshing as a morning breeze. He touched the cave walls, and it instantly cooled him down. Pressed his body to the inside rock, and it cooled him down further. Invigorated, he peered into the deep, dark, seemingly unfathomable cave. He imagined he heard voices. Thieves, he thought. Picking up a stick, he shouted, Leave my treasure alone, you rascals. Began an imaginary sword fight with invisible thieves, a fight in which he subsequently won. Of course. He found very interesting looking stones on the cave floor and decided that he had found his long lost treasure. As he went, he filled his pockets and his rucksack, and filled his shirt pockets, until he realized he had found more treasure than he could carry. He felt disappointed. There was so much more treasure here. He started to look at each rock, each stone, trying to compare them in order to decide which one was worth keeping and which one had to be left behind. It was an impossible task, for all of them were beautiful in their own unique way. Even the weirdly shaped ones, with dark and so-called ugly features, he simply could not choose between them all. He sat down for a moment and stared into the depths again of the deep cave. He instantly relaxed his body and his mind. He sat content, thinking of nothing. The pressure of his previous conflicting thoughts released like a pressure valve releasing steam from imploding water pipes. He let out a huge sigh of relief. He stood up, looked at all the treasure, and with his hands on his hips, he thought, tomorrow I will bring my friends here, and they can take the rest of the treasure. He smiled, and no doubt those thieves will have returned, and we will have to fight them off. Again he smiled. He looked to the cave entrance and noticed the light was not as bright as it was earlier. He lifted his heavy rock-filled rucksack over his small shoulders and made his way out of the cave. As much as the light had dulled, it still stung his eyes as he moved from darkness of the cave to the light. He could hardly keep his eyes open, but with a short time they had adjusted, and he could see large, grey, bellowing clouds coming towards him. They slowly edged towards him as he departed for home. Now, as he reached every horizon, he looked behind his shoulder and saw the clouds slowly catching up with him. He tried to walk faster. He felt 5 times heavier with all the treasures he had loaded himself up with. He began to really wish he did have a can, and that he was as muscular and strong as the Pharaoh he imagined himself earlier to be. The journey homeward felt much longer than he remembered on the way in. His small legs began to buckle, With each step, he felt he was sinking deeper and deeper into the earth. On the next horizon, he had to stop, wiping gallons of sweat from his forehead, and out of his young, innocent eyes, he could just barely make out the yellow patch of pando trees that were close to his farm. He knew them well because his father told him that they are the oldest trees in the world. In fact, it's actually only one tree. It has identically cloned itself many times. His dad said the tree is 80,000 years old. His dad laughed when Matthew asked him if that meant the tree was older than him. Home still seemed a million miles away as Matthew once again looked behind him at the chasing clouds. He looked back toward the pando tree and could see a little bit clearer now. Now the sweat had been wiped away. He felt the heaviness of the rucksack. He felt the shaking weakness of his knees. He felt a soft, growing whimper growing from his small heart. I can't make it, he sadly thought, as his eyes began to well up. His heavy, small back was aching all over. He thought about emptying his rucksack to lighten the load. And as he thought about that, a single tear dropped from his eye and rolled slowly down his fresh-faced cheek. I know it's just stones and rocks, he said to himself, but it's treasure to me. I don't want to just dump them. He sat down, not caring if the dark, greying clouds caught up with him anymore. He gazed towards his destination and wondered what his mum and dad would be doing right now. He saw them working out in the field. He remembered them out in the field working hard for weeks and weeks, from dawn until dusk. He hardly spent much time with them during harvest time. When he did, they were always exhausted. Found it strange. Now he thought about it. But not once did he see them cry or complain about the hard work. Dad always smiled when he saw me, Matthew said to himself. At breakfast, in the morning, he'd always say, "Good morning, champ." He would tell me I'm getting bigger and stronger every day. At night, he was too tired to speak, but he always smiled at me. When my dad smiles, his eyes smile too, my mum would say. Then Matthew thought about his mum. No matter how tired she was, she always ruffled his hair and kneeling down would say, "Who's my beautiful boy? You're so handsome. When you grow up, you're going to break all the girls' hearts." Matthew didn't want to break anybody's hearts, he thought. he loved feeling adored. At times, she was so tired she would fall asleep in the chair whilst reading him his bedtime story. He didn't stop trying just because it was difficult, he thought. His dad didn't stop smiling even though he was too exhausted to speak. And I shouldn't give up now, Matthew said to himself in a calm, strong, determined tone. He took a huge, deep and invigorating breath, and as he exhaled, he rose up to his feet as a huge wind blew a gale. It gusted in perfect symmetry with his body, almost lifting him an inch off the ground and gently placing him down again. He eyed the general direction of his home area and with gusto went forth. Hours seemed to pass as the ever closer yellow pandan trees, still glistening in the late evening sun. The thunderous purple-black clouds thickened and were directly above him now, spitting the first signs of a torrential downpour. Far behind him, he heard crackling thunderclaps. Soon they would disperse the beaming sun rays that were in front of him, that seemed to shine the spotlight on his target. Home. Home. To Mum. To Dad, he thought. The small body feeling the full weight of each step, of each rock, of each moment of a stormy night approaching. As he neared, he could see lightning flashes reflecting off the sunlit bright white handlebark of the trees, their brilliant yellow leaves beginning to furiously blow with the incoming winds. He paused briefly, looking up at the beautiful trees with fascination. 80,000 years, he said out loud. He didn't know what that meant. He just knew that he was 10 or 3/4 years old, and that already felt like forever. He also knew, because he was smart, that 80 was 8 times 10. 8 times forever, plus 1,000, he marvelled to himself. As he gazed up upon the marvellous tree, suddenly a dark shadow slowly crept up its bark, turning its once brilliant white into a darkening grey. As the shadow from the clouds inched towards the leaves, the tree seemed to fade into the background, almost becoming invisible as the thunderstorm loomed heavy. It threatened for the first time to overshadow Matthew. The light rain began to thicken as Matthew dashed toward home. He could see the brick and wood-log structure with its thatched roof. He was almost there. One last push, thought. As he bundled his way toward the back garden, he could see the window lit with orange ochre glow of a home-made fire. He looked above and then at the wall of his house and decided to race the incoming storm. With the last of his second breath and with every ounce of his last energy, he sprinted. The heavy rock-filled rucksack swaying clumsily from shoulder to shoulder. Out of breath, his hands heavily patted the wall as it stopped his sprint. "Made it," he exclaimed. Suddenly, it felt like a huge weight descended on him. He slipped the shoulder strap of the rucksack from one side, and the whole thing immediately collapsed off his back, landing in the soft grass with a tremendous thud. He suddenly felt lighter and lighter, his shoulders rising up as if they were about to sprout wings and propel him up towards the sky. The sensation made him giggle, and as he walked around the corner of the house, he felt like he was hovering, which made him giggle more. As he turned the corner, he saw in the distance his father leaning on his cycle. Matthew could see that there was more than enough harvest in the crops. He felt happy and a sense of deep relief. Mum and Dad wouldn't need to work so hard, and that meant they would play with him more. I know, he thought, when they are all rested up, I will show them where the treasure is. Then we can all fight away those thieves together, and we can all be pharaohs and reclaim all of our treasure. Mum and Dad don't know where the treasure is hidden, so I will need to lead the way. The thought of adventuring with his parents filled Matthew's small heart with love. He knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he was truly home. Matthew flipped the page of his diary, chewed on the end of his pen for a moment, and then began to write. Today was a good day. Every single little thing is going to be okay. I am very, very tired, but tomorrow I will tell you what happens when we go back to get the treasure from Mum and Dad. And even though I don't know who you are that is reading my diary, I just want to say I love you. You are my friend. You are beautiful. He closed his diary, popped his head out from behind his covers, placed it gently on the bedside cabinet. He flicked off his bed light and lay back in a soft, cosy bed, his head sinking deeply into the soft feather pillow. He noticed that the storm had passed, and the air was gentle, and there was still silence. His eyes were getting heavier and heavier, and as they gently closed over, in his mind's eye, he saw images of the day floating by clouds on a dark and starry night. He tried to follow them, but he was now slipping deeper and deeper towards sleep. He felt so relaxed, so comfortable. He simply could not resist the call of sleep and began to let go, letting go, letting